welcome to another Ramblogue, and I think one of the weirder ones I'm going to do. There's such an element of why are you doing this to this one. But I kind of said the point of these would be that, like, I'll just sort of talk about whatever is on my mind. That's kind of the purpose of these, is like, if there's no place for me to talk about something that I'm sort of watching or something I'm thinking about at the time relating to sort of TV and movies, I'm probably going to stick it in one of these if I really want to talk about it. And I recently noticed, it's so random. I recently noticed that Amazon Prime had all of the Rocky movies, all 8 of them. So we're talking the first 5, Rocky Balboa, and the 2 Creeds. And I couldn't help myself. I was so curious. I was like, I haven't seen these movies in a very long time. I remember I really, really loved the first couple. And then obviously Rocky Balboa, Creed. I think the Creed movies are all pretty solid. So I was like, it wobbles in the middle, particularly 4 and 5. But let's 2 out of 8 isn't bad if that's the case. So let's dive in and see how they go. So I watched them all. Well, no, sorry, I watched the first 4 and I watched the second 4 for another video in this. Maybe next week or the week after, once I get around to having watched all 4 of them. The final 4, I should say. So I've watched the first 4 Rocky movies this week, and I want to very briefly just talk about them because it's really bizarre. They are different to how I remember. The first one has a lot of scenes expressing ideas that other scenes have already expressed in clearer ways. It's like I know the irony of this is not lost on me. It's a really rambly movie. Like, it just sort of meanders about, like, doing random stuff. And while I'm normally all for spend all the time with the characters to invest you in the story, there's not enough necessarily depth to any of it to even justify the amount of time they spend to it. It's actually quite a simple story, and the characters are pretty straightforward. I'm not saying they're not without their complexities or nuance at all, but they are pretty, like, you understand where they're coming from pretty early on, and the movie never really goes deeper. It just keeps repeating those same surface ideas, so it kind of starts feeling redundant at a certain point. So it's like a 2-hour movie, the first one. I would definitely trim it to an hour and a half, personally, but, an Oscar-nominated script, I guess. Even within some scenes, Rocky will say the same thing multiple times. The whole movie's got a kind of like Ramblecore, or Mumblecore they call it, like vibe to it, which, I didn't think Mumblecore filmmaking existed at this point, but like the way Rocky speaks in these sort of long diatribes that just like sort of mumble and go around in circles, it does feel reminiscent of a more recent, well, I say more recent, not recent now, but in the grand scheme of cinema, a more modern sort of movement towards, so especially in indie films, these kind of films without like directly structured dialogue, where they go into a scene knowing what the characters are going to say roughly, but not like the exact wording, so the characters say it more naturally, and you end up with these sort of like movies that come across a little bit like these Ramblougues, I guess. The first Rocky it doesn't feel very tight at all, both in terms of the dialogue, in terms of the structure, in terms of the editing. Like, you could take a knife to that movie, and I was really surprised by that, because my memory of the first Rocky movie is that it's like this brilliant character piece, and the rest of them go off the rails, and it doesn't go off the rails. It's a pretty grounded movie, but it's also not really a big character study. It's, he's a simple guy, ruled by a pretty simple goal, and that's fine. Like, so it is still a good movie. There is some problematic stuff in it. The first one, he's very pushy in pursuing Adrian romantically, and that's doesn't sit well with me these days. She's clearly uncomfortable, and he can kind of almost forces himself into her life, and it's particularly the kiss, which at the time, the first kiss, which I think at the time came across as kind of romantic, comes across a little rapey now, which is a shame. Certainly the build up. I think once they do kiss, I suppose she leans in too. She's in, like, the movie kind of tells us she's into it. But the entire, like, 5-minute scene, 10-minute scene before it, which is supposed to just indicate to us that she's shy, reads differently in modern context. it reads as someone who's uncomfortable, wants to get out of the situation. I think she says that multiple times, and he's just like, "Come in, come in." And he's such an imposing guy because he's a boxer. It's like, yeah, it feels real rough to watch these days. If I'm being honest, that section, I understand what they were going for at the time, and it's not. The intention is not the connotation that you now take from it, but I think, wiser eyes, like time has gone on, we've learned a bit about like how we deal with these situations, and yeah, not cool, Rocky, not cool, too pushy. She's a great character though, and I will say I do like the idea, even if the execution comes across a bit rough these days, because Rocky has to be really pushy to make it work. The idea that someone like him is interested in her because partly because almost because she's shy, like he's kind of enamored with her personality. Like he's attracted to her, but he also thinks she's like interesting, and that's kind of sweet, I guess. But yeah, it doesn't come off great these days, unfortunately. Although not the intent, I'm sure. I do think the core idea of the film is still solid. The first one, like Rocky, gets this shot at the title, even though he's kind of a nobody, and it's all summed up really brilliantly in this one line. He goes up against Apollo Creed in this movie, who is the champion, and the premise, I guess, of the first Rocky movie, those who don't remember, is just basically Apollo Creed's next contender pulls out, and no one will face him so last minute. So he says, well, why don't we make it for the press? We'll make a big spectacle out of it, and we'll say, hey, we're going to give a nobody a shot at the title, like not a ranked person. We're going to pull someone from out of absolutely nowhere, and they just choose Rocky. Because he kind of likes his name, and he takes it really seriously. Rocky trains and has that fire in him and wants to prove himself, and he knows he can't beat Apollo. He just wants to survive. No one's ever gone all 15 rounds with Apollo, and he wants to do that. They lay out Rocky's goal really early. He knows he can't beat the champ because that would be ridiculous, but he wants to show him that he's got that heart. And then Apollo gets in there and he's showboating, and then the fight starts, and there's the Apollo's trainer is you've come here for a show, this guy's come here to fight. Or you think this is a show, this guy thinks it's a fight. And it's just such a brilliant line of dialogue, and it sums up the whole movie in a line. It's great. And for those who don't know, Rocky doesn't win, but he does go the distance, and sort of shows that he's not worthless, essentially, which is the premise of the movie. So again, yeah, I think it's a really good film. Definitely could be shorter. The ending is very sudden also, and I don't think it's 100. I almost respect so much that they don't even play too much into the fact that he lost. He's in the ring shouting for Adrian, it's all he wants, and everyone's in cheering and stuff, and it's almost as if he won. Even though you can clearly hear the commentator in the background, but they don't even focus on that. They don't even show you the announcer saying that Apollo won. It's just, you can just be paying attention, you hear it. So I could imagine somebody actually watching that first movie and not even being aware that Rocky didn't win. Then we move into the second movie, which is kind of like a really solid sequel to the first, which is that Apollo feels like Rocky showed him up because he should have put him down. And he's not going to take him lightly, and he wants a rematch. Rocky, turns out, is not great. He was just like, oh, well, I'm kind of a famous face now because I got to fight the champ. I'll just do adverts and make my money that way to support my new family. I think Adrian's pregnant in the second one. And it's the second one, I think, is a really solid follow-up because it's kind of the logical extension of that. Rocky sort of down as luck again because it turns out he's not particularly capable of acting or being the face of promotional campaigns, doing commercials and stuff. So he's sort of running out of money again. And he's refusing, for Adrian's sake, to fight Apollo again. But he ends up going for it because money is tight, and Apollo is not taking him lightly this time. So it's going to be an even tougher fight. The movie builds it up. It's probably the best one because it's way tighter than the first, but it's still also reasonably grounded. And the fight the fight is better, I think, than the fight in the first one. It's more gripping, I think. They kind of figured out how to shoot boxing. Oh, worth noting, and this is just a criticism for across all of the movies I've seen. I'll have to think about this for the next 4 when I get to them, but for the first 4, all of them, absolutely, universally, terrible boxing. Just bad boxing. all across all of the movies. The way they move, the way they punch, it's just you would get killed if you boxed the way these guys boxed in real life. Like the amount of time Rocky spends with his hands down, and the amount of haymakers they're throwing constantly. These fighters wouldn't last 2 minutes; they'd be exhausted. Like no, it's. But if anyone who watches combat sports, watches these movies, it has to just suspend disbelief, and that is generally a rule in sports movies, but it's particularly bad here. Rocky hardly ever blocks with his hands. They're hardly ever using the jab. It's all just. He's throwing huge punches, and he's throwing huge punches. No, thank you for realism on all of them. That criticism is across the board so far. I'll let you know if any of them. I mean, I'll be really interested to know how Rocky Balboa and the Creed movies hold up in the boxing. Did they learn between the two sets? I suspect 5's going to be a mess no matter what I do. Anyway, so 2 I think is probably the best one because it's still relatively grounded. But it's got a really good fight and a much tighter script. It doesn't have as much of the rambly, repetitive, like, here's a scene showing Rocky feels this way, and then here's another scene that's different that also shows Rocky feels this way. There's less of that in the second one. Thumbs up. Again, all these are available if you're in the UK on Amazon Prime if you want to watch through them. They're fun. Then the third one is, I think, the typical third movie dip in quality, but I do think it's the smartest thing for them to have done story-wise. So for those who don't remember, the third one is when he has to fight Clubber Lang, who is this new up-and-coming, hungry young boxer. And Rocky has had the belt for a little while now. And it's the roles reversed, you know. Rocky comes into the fight with Clubber Lang. All this spectacle. He's trained inside of like a a gym where people can take photos of him while he's doing it. And he's doing photos with fans while he's training, and like it's all video. It's all it's all being recorded, and like it's all spectacle, And he's making the mistake Apollo made in the first movie, not taking his opponent too seriously. So Clubber Lang beats him, and then it becomes he wants to have the rematch, and then he gets Apollo Creed, who learnt that lesson at the hands of Rocky, to teach him. And I think that's pretty genius, both from the Creed character perspective. I think Creed comes to him, actually, rather than the way around, because Clubber Lang is a brilliant villain. He's the best villain of the series, I think. The idea that like Creed learned his lesson from being shown up by Rocky and then has to train Rocky and how to like what he has to do to sort of overcome like someone who's that young and that hungry with his sort of older body, and like shows Rocky to stop being such a brawler, maybe be a little bit faster. I think it works really well. I think it's a really good conclusion. Honestly, if the movies had ended here, it'd be a really solid trilogy. Like again, the third one is the weakest, like in so many franchises. But kind of like the Back to the Future movies, it's like weakest, yes. Terrible? No, I think it's pretty good. Like it's sillier, for sure, a bit more cartoonish, but it hasn't quite gone off the deep end yet. That's the movie after. We'll come to that in a second. But yeah, I think the third Rocky film is really solid. I think I like the relationship between Apollo and Rocky. I think it develops beautifully in the film. I like what they do with Creed here. He's always shown himself to be very smart. Even in the second movie, when he was trying to convince Rocky to do a rematch and Rocky wouldn't, he was like, well, if I have to be the villain to convince him to do this, and I have to like taunt him and mock him, I understand how to make this happen. They've always portrayed him as like a very smart fighter and a very smart businessman, leading the business of boxing as well, and that's very consistent through these first 3 films. Less so in the fourth, but we'll come to that. Showing Rocky sort of, and they do it really well, actually. I think showing Rocky like the way he's training and the way he comes out to the ring, it's so, you're just like, you're doing the exact same thing that in the first movie Creed did, not training tough enough, not putting in the effort in, underestimate your opponent, coming out in like with loads of showboating and not actually like focused on the fight you're about to have. It's a show to you, not a fight. It's just funny that kind of comes full circle, and it's really clever. And of course, it ends with the very iconic, and it is the perfect ending to the Rocky franchise. Like if it ended there, it would have been so good. The deal is Apollo's like, you owe me a favor if I help you win this fight. So they do that. Rocky wins because it's a sports movie, and then the favor is that he wants a private rematch with Rocky, a third match. He won the first one. Rocky won the second one. He says, I want the third. And they're in the ring. They're taunting each other a little bit, but playfully. They're circling each other. And they both go in for the hit, and it freezes. And that's the end of the movie. And it's just perfect. Like, you don't need to know. Like, it's not important, who actually won. It's great. Clubber Lang, true villain, disrespectful to everyone. Like, even in the first one, like Apollo, while being a bit of an antagonist, was not really a villain as such. He was a mixture of, like, you understood his reasons for doing what he was doing. He was, he was trying to put on a show. He was, again, the business of boxing. Like, he wasn't a bad guy. He wasn't ever trying to hurt Rocky. He wasn't ever trying to, like, in the second one he becomes more of an antagonist, I would say, when he's sort of like insulting Rocky. But he's only doing that to position himself as the villain, to make the box office figures for this for the fight go up, but also to convince Rocky to come back. So it's, again, you always understand his motivation. Clubber Lang is just outright an arsehole. And it's worth noting, because I haven't really talked about performances thus far. I think the actress that plays Adrian is wonderful in all these movies. Stallone, he kind of forgets the character in the third one, but the first two, Stallone's absolutely stellar. In the third one, it's like he completely forgets that mumbly, kind of incoherent character he created, and he's way more eloquent. He's wearing suits now. It's like, I know they're trying to express that he's sort of moved up as a result of his fame, and he's changed because of his fame, but it's almost too much. It's almost unbelievable. The guy who plays Mickey, I always forget the actor's name. I think he's passed now, very sadly, but he's wonderful in it as well. Carl Weathers, obviously, playing Apollo Creed, incredible. It's a really good cast. The guy that plays Paulie too, solid work all the time. So yeah, the cast are pretty. I don't think there's we'll see what happens once I watch the fifth one. But all the movies I have clearest memories of going forward, and all these ones I've just rewatched, not a bad performance in the bunch, really, with the exception of maybe the Rocky, Stallone kind of forgetting how Rocky speaks in the third one. Again, I understand how they got there. Didn't work for me. The fourth one, oh dear. I'll try to be quick. Because, very quickly, sorry, I forgot to say, the reason I was talking about cast is because I do think Mr. T, perfect villain. Clubber Lang, just absolutely disrespectful to everyone. You really do grow to hate him. Because it's almost like he's there to hurt people. Like, he's a bad person, and you know that really early on. They set him up perfectly. The way he's taunting Apollo Creed as Creed comes up to shake his hand, like right early, early-ish in the movie. They do a really good job making you hate him. And Mr. T sets it up beautifully. Like, he delivers the exact performance he needs to. I mean, he is just, in a lot of ways, he is just big Mr. T, but it's well cast, and he does a really good job becoming a villain you really do love to hate. So yeah, the first three all actually surprisingly good. First one's a little flabby. Third one's probably the weakest. So the second is kind of that sweet spot. Because the third one, I guess, is starting to come around to where it's getting a bit sillier, a bit more cartoony. Clubber Lang is a mustache-twirling villain, whereas previously we'd had a more complex antagonist in Apollo Creed. And then we get to the fourth one. It's a bad movie. It's a really bad movie. I do think Drago is a good and interesting villain. The idea of, like, sort of like the Russians, like, sciencing themselves a perfect fighter, but the idea is, Rocky has that heart and will overcome the obstacle. The only problem with that is to really set up Ivan Drago as the villain. They have to have him beat Apollo Creed early in the movie to sort of give Rocky his, and what happens is they have to undo all of Apollo Creed's character building. So in the first movie, he underestimates Rocky, comes out, he's showboating, and then, like, he suddenly realizes, oh no, I'm not here for a show, I'm here for a fight. It turns out, like, the other guy, I'm coming back to that line again because it kind of sums up the whole franchise. It's a really good idea, the idea of a boxer that's been at the top so long, he's kind of forgotten what truly having to grit your teeth and properly fight for something is. It's a great concept. And then they show him over the course of the 3 movies learning that lesson and then passing it to Rocky when Rocky ends up in the same situation. That's why those first 3 movies work so well as a unit. This one, Creed makes the same mistake. He challenges Drago for xenophobia. It's unclear. He wants to show America's great over the Russians and that this Russian guy is nothing. He's like all cocky. He's like not taking him seriously. He's not training properly. His entrance to the ring is absolutely absurd. I'm not even going to describe it. Just if you can find it online, it's amazing. It's truly, it's something else. And then he gets beaten, and he actually, and this is where the movies really go off the rails, to be honest with you, because Ivan Drago, first of all, is like this, like superhero-esque or supervillain-esque, I suppose, character. He's like built in Russia with like machines, and like not literally, he's a human, but like they're steroiding him up, and he's always hooked up to all these machines, and always like analyzing the exact like amount of pressure his punches create, and like perfecting him like scientifically, and it just kind of comes across as a bit absurd in the movie. Also, Rocky buys Paulie a robot that sort of acts like Paulie's wife. As the movie goes on, like, there's this running joke that the robot kind of becomes his wife and starts nagging him, and it's weird. It's really weird. There's a robot in this movie, like I don't even know. And then so Apollo gets beat, having somehow forgotten the lesson he both learned and then passed on in the first 3 movies. Like his entire arc for the first 3 movies is just erased for reasons. And then Rocky agrees to fight Drago in Russia, and then we have the other thing, this movie has too many montages. The 4th one has all the montages. Why? So the other 3 movies all had montages, but there were 2 kinds. There's the song montage for the training montage, which each movie has one of, and then they occasionally do a small montage during the fight to skip some of the rounds. They did that in 2 of the 3 movies that preceded this, I think. I think they do it in 1 and 2, and then don't do it in 4. And don't do it in 3. So basically, 1 proper to a song training montage in the original 3 movies each, and 1 kind of not really a montage set to a song, but like a sort of mini montage to get you, just to move you ahead in the fights, because the fights are full fights for the first 2, not the 3rd one. The 4th one has a montage after Apollo dies, where Rocky's driving all angry because Apollo has been, died at the hands of Ivan Drago, and he's all mad about it. But it doesn't. It's just shots from the previous movies. It's like a 4-minute. It's like a 4-minute montage that is just mostly footage from the other movies, set to a, banging 80s tune. Which, by the way, again, if we're talking blanket statements, all these movies have amazing music. From that sort of like Gonna Fly Now, like that famous Rocky training song, Eye of the Tiger. There's just so many good songs. So there's a montage where Rocky's just like looking angrily as he drives his car all angry, and then it's just cutting back and forth to various shots from the previous 3 movies, and then shots of Apollo's fight with Ivan, and then there's a montage. There's a training montage, then it breaks it up with a scene, and then there's another training montage, and then there's another montage in the middle of the fight that's a little bit more montagey than previous ones. So the previous ones were kind of like, oh, we're going to quickly do a few cuts to show you time passing in the fight. This one, like, actually, I think is set to music and stuff. So there are essentially like 4 montages in this movie. It's ridiculous. So yeah, there's that. The idea is that he goes to Russia and they contrast in the montages Drago, this hyper sciencey fight training, whereas Rocky is like out in the Russian wilderness, like lugging logs around to train, which is great for like strength and stuff, but does not help you learn how to box. I guess the idea they were going for was he already has the boxing skill, he's just trying to get as strong as Drago. Maybe that's what they were going for. Doesn't really come across. Also, he randomly brings Paulie and Apollo's old like manager trainer out with him, and then doesn't train with them that much. Like he leaves them in a cabin while he goes off to do his lugging logs around. So it's kind of like, why did you drag them out? And then the final fight. So the fight itself physically is a Rocky fight. It's reasonably well staged, kind of exciting. Again, terrible if you actually look at it from a boxing perspective. But the idea is Rocky comes out and they're all booing him because they're Russians and he's the American. He's the enemy. They're all booing him. And then they're cheering for Drago. Drago and him start fighting and he's showing so much heart because he's all about the heart. And they start cheering for Rocky as the fight goes on, as much as I keep saying Ivan Drago. And then at the end of the fight, Rocky wins. He gives this speech. And it might be one of the most embarrassing pieces of writing I've come across in some long time. It's like, I didn't know how to feel about you guys because you were booing me. And then, you started to change and think differently of me. And I started to change about thinking about you. And if maybe if we all could change, the world would be a better place. It's like he's trying to create world peace. But he's Rocky, so he's talking like a caveman. It's fucking awful. Oh, it's so bad, and it's so on the nose. Looking at it's the least subtle thing. It's not clever. It doesn't work very well. It's not very convincing. It's not particularly well performed. It's okay. It's still unusual, I guess, maybe level. I don't know. He's a harder actor to sort of pin down because he does a very specific thing, and it's hard to say he's not doing that specific thing well because it's the thing he does all the time. But yeah, it's a bad movie. The fourth one's a really bad movie. I am fascinated because the fifth one is the one I've seen the least, and it's the one I saw the longest to go. So I genuinely have no idea. I remember it being awful. I remember it being even worse than the fourth one, so I'm dreading watching that. And then kind of excited to see Rocky Balboa and the two Creed movies. So yeah, I don't know if we'll come back to these in a week or two, I guess. If people enjoyed this, I don't know. It's a bit random to just be like, I'm going to review the Rocky movies. But yeah, it's been an interesting ride. I'm kind of fascinated by them. They're weird, and I love that. So yeah, I've talked too long. Oh dear, this one's one of my longest yet. No, I guess I've reviewed 4 movies in this time. So, yeah. So should you go back and watch the Rocky movies? Yeah, why not? They're kind of interesting. The fourth, maybe not the fourth one, the fifth one. Maybe just watch the first 3, and then that's the problem though, isn't it? Because the second Creed movie ties right back to this fourth one. That's annoying. That's a shame. It feels like if they hadn't linked it to the Drago of it all in the second Creed movie, you could watch the first 3 and then watch Rocky Balboa and the Creed movies. Although actually, I do remember the premise for Rocky Balboa being kind of insane, like the actual initial conceit of why he's fighting again at his age. But we'll come back to that, I think. So yeah. That's it for this week, or today on this. Come back in a week or two, I guess, whenever I get to it, to talk about the next 4 Rocky movies. If you'd like more content that's as random and weird as this, please let me know. If you'd never like me to talk about just random old movies, again, let me know. I would say as well, I wouldn't rule out these movies at some point coming up on an episode of Rewind Reviews, but I'll tell you now, not anytime soon. Yeah, I don't think Chris has seen many, if any, of these movies, so it would be fun to get him to watch some of them and see what he thinks. But it's a bit of a commitment because there's 8 of them, and I feel like the ones that are the most fun to review are the bad ones in the middle. So you'd have to watch so many. But yeah, thanks very much for listening, and I guess I'll see you guys on the next one.